Thank you, Mr. Chafets, for an excellent, inspiring, and entertaining presentation. You presented brilliantly the situation of the Jewish people in the United States and in Israel as it is. But the issue is not what is the situation, but what ought the situation be. You said that we ought to take survival off the agenda. Judaism, in all of its forms, including the most radical that exists today and the more radical that I believe will exist in the future and that I want to exist, will exist only if the agenda continues to be what it has always been, namely survival. To be a Jew means to care about the survival of the Jewish people. I disagree with the ultra-Orthodox, with the Orthodox, with the conservatives, with the reformers, with the Reconstructionists, with the secularist humanists, and with some other groups that don't have names yet. But they and I all agree that survival is the agenda. I don't know exactly what that survival is going to be, but I want the survival of the most radical groups in the future to have some things in common with the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Israel that I can stand no more than you. Because although I can't stand them, and including the members of my own family who belong to that group, they and I share a common heritage. I refuse to surrender Judaism to them. I refuse to give them Shabbat. I refuse to give them the Tanakh. I refuse to give them our heritage. It belongs to me and to my children and my grandchildren as much as it belongs to them. And therefore, you cannot take survival off the agenda. The only agenda of Judaism that I recognize has always been the agenda of survival. That's why we're here. And therefore, although you and I share much in common, including a sense of humor, strange sense of humor, I cannot agree with you, and I consider it the sin of cynicism to say that intermarriage is a good thing. Intermarriage may be a wonderful thing for the young man and the young woman involved, but it is not a good thing for the future of the Jewish people. Because if the couple decides to raise their children as Jews, if they decide not to raise their children as Jews, then we've lost. But if they decide to raise their children as Jews, it's going to be so difficult because the children are going to have non-Jewish members of their family. It is a very, very difficult problem. It makes survival much more difficult. Okay, I don't want to hog the. Let me say one other thing.
It's very interesting.
He asked about Israel. There were those who went to Israel, and there were those in the Zionist movement from the earliest days who were going to those who went to Israel to escape Judaism. There was such. Excuse me, Shulamit, I'll show you in the books of David Shimoni. He wrote poems about them. There were those who went to escape their Jewish identity, just as many Jews came to America to escape their Jewish identity. But there were those who came to create a new Judaism. And you dismissed labor Zionism a bit too cavalierly for me. I'm a product of labor Zionism. I'm a product of the Yiddishist movement. I know that I would not be a Jew today had there not been a reform movement to open the doors of Judaism for me. All of these things are still alive. They're not dead yet. They are now they have reached a plateau. Some of them are sinking, but they haven't sunk yet. And we are here, as I understand it, at this colloquium to find out what can be rescued, because we care about the survival of the Jewish people. We care about the survival of that heritage. Genug gesagt.
Let me say, first of all, that you and I do share a sense of humor. That's important. Look, everything that anybody can say about Jewish identity is true and then some. And but I think one of the great differences, and maybe it's just a temperamental difference between the two of us, is that I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. I don't think that we need to rescue Judaism from anything. I think that Judaism, not Judaism, I think the Jewish people, we're talking about Jewish identity, so let's talk about the Jewish people. The Jewish people are in a dreamlike state at the moment. Never in history, never in Jewish history have the Jewish people been in such great shape. We have our own state, which is flourishing. We have almost no persecution of Jews any place in the world. We have a large, self-confident community, vital community in the United States of millions of people, which is, if it's not running the American political and cultural establishments, it's doing a pretty good imitation of it. And it seems to me that to call, to sleep with your boots on during wartime makes a lot of sense. I think to sleep with your boots on during peacetime is an annoyance. And I think to do it as a sartorial statement is a mistake. So I don't know, I'm not a Yiddishist. I don't know any Yiddish. It worked for you. Nifty worked for me. Something else worked probably for every single person at this table, or a combination of things. I'm only saying that in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time, in 50 years' time, things will work. It won't be your thing. It won't be Yiddish. It won't be my thing. But it'll be somebody's thing. It'll be the thing of those Jews who are alive then, and that it'll be what they want.
Not if there won't be any people around calling themselves Jews.
Well, first of all, there will be millions of people around calling themselves Jews or being called Jews by their relatives in Israel. So I don't think that we're...
Not if there will be peace with the Arabs. You will have the same intermarriage problem in Israel that we have in America here. There will be mass intermarriage with the Arabs.
Well,
You're kidding yourself, my friend.
I'm not... look, I would be happy to marry an Arab if I weren't already married. I've been married 3 times. I've done my share. But I'm just going to have to say something to Dr. Goldsmith, which I don't intend it to be rude. I really don't, and I say it with it's something I wouldn't have said 10 years ago. To oppose intermarriage, if you're a Chabad Chassid and you oppose intermarriage, nicha, I understand that. But to be a secular humanist and to oppose intermarriage? Excuse me. What are we talking about? We're talking about human beings marrying one another.
The question is not opposing it. The question, you said it's a good thing.
Yes, it's a good thing. I think it's a very good thing for Jews. I also think that intramarriage is an excellent thing. I think that it's... I do. I think that it...
couldn't hurt.
What is it that I think is a good thing? I'll say it in a sentence. What I think is a good thing is for Jews to feel self-confident, human, and normal enough to marry anyone they goddamn well want to. That's what I think is a good thing. And I'm not worried about the future of the Jewish people, because the Jewish people will survive with or without those people who marry out and stay out. And it will also attract, people will come in and out, and if Judaism is an attractive, if the Jewish house in America, whichever it is, with all its rooms, is an attractive house, more people will come in than leave. And if it's an unattractive place, you can have a shadchan on every corner, and it's not going to do any good, because people won't stay.
Egon and then Jack. Okay, Egon.
Well, today we spoke with somebody about the Bund. There was a leader of the Bund, Vladimir Medem, who said, well, I am neutral. If Jews assimilate, okay, let them assimilate. If they will not assimilate, okay. It's more or less the same philosophy. I would say es wird uns gar nicht helfen. It will not help us. We will never be a normal people. We will never be a normal people. We had these meshugas of the prophets who were kulam meshugoim, and therefore the world loved us, and they know Jews always strive to something more. And what a kind of businessman are you, leaving the Orthodox, the whole business of Judaism? Just the contrary, you must outdo them. You must show them that you have a better way of being Jewish. You can't say, I am neutral, let them take all the business for them. No, it's a fight for the meaning of Judaism. And of course, we all secular humanists are not so worried by intermarriage, but I think we should care that the results of intermarriage should be more Jewish children, more Jewish education for Jewish children. And I think that in spite what all the prophets of post-Zionism say, Zionism still has a role in Jewish life, and Zionism is not dead. And I think that after Herzl has come the hour of Achat Ha'am, Zionism, and that Israel must have challenges and needs challenges, and also the secular Israel needs challenges, and one of those challenges are to build a new relationship with the Jewish people in the diaspora based on Jewish values, Jewish ethics, Jewish culture, Jewish languages. For instance, let us talk more seriously about Hebraization of the diaspora, more Hebrew in the diaspora. There are a lot of challenges, and I think the Jewish people has always been what it had been because it went against the mainstream and sought always new challenges.
Again, I can't disagree in particular, but I can only sort of wonder. We talk about, okay, the prophets. We have Egon talked about what differentiates us from the others, why we're a special people, is we have the prophets. I just wrote a column in the Jerusalem Report this week, which some of you perhaps may not have read. which is called the Talmud, What's It Good For? And you know that song, right? Absolutely nothing. The point being that for the last 15 or 20 years, I've been asking Talmud scholars when I run into them, and you'd be surprised how many you run into in Jerusalem. What is there in the Talmud that, I'm talking now about ethics and morality, not about, the laws of how to kosher a bowl, but universal ethics and morality that isn't known generally to any well-educated 14-year-old in any country in the Western world? And the answer is nothing. We, with all due respect, don't have a monopoly on the prophets. Everything, all of the moral values that the prophets had to teach are generally available in any Christian church in this country. And if I wanted to think very hard about who I've seen putting the words of the prophets into political reality in my lifetime, I would have to say Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement more than I said any particular Jewish organization. So that I think that to talk about particularistic things which are in fact no longer, it's true that we had them first. And if that's the chauvinist point, then yeah, we had them first, okay. So, but we don't have them anymore to ourselves. And therefore, to educate our children in the prophets is not to give them a particularistic Jewish education. On the other end of the spectrum is Hebrew. Naturally, I support studying Hebrew. I studied Hebrew even before I went to Israel. I took 3 semesters of it at the University of Michigan, and I got the only C's I ever got in college. I got in Hebrew. It's a hard language, and I very much favor it. However, I don't think it's possible to force American Jews to begin to speak Hebrew. Now, if people here spontaneously decide that they would like to speak Hebrew, they will. And if they decide they want to send their kids to Hebrew schools, then they will. And if they decide that they don't, it doesn't necessarily make them bad Jews. It only makes them Jews who don't have access to a particular thing, which would, that would make them more educated if they did have access to it. Finally, this deal about we have to outfight the Orthodox for Judaism and so on and so forth, and I'm a bad businessman. Well, that's true. That's really true. I am a terrible businessman. But as to the rest of it, I don't get it. What are we fighting over? We have each of us and all of us together our values. I'm not a post-Zionist. I'm a Zionist. I'm an Israeli. I'm a secular guy. I'm a secular Jew, I guess I'd say. But I don't see why I have to get into a struggle over it. What I have to do is to ensure that the society in which I live is a society in which there is freedom of speech and freedom of voting and a fair judiciary system and the rest of it. And that in itself is the victory over orthodoxy. That's the victory. For me to convince some guy or some community that the pork is really very tasty, I'm not going to be able to do that. But what I can do is create the political conditions in which, if he wants to live in my Jewish state, he has to live according to my Jewish rules, which are the Jewish rules of humanistic secular Judaism as it is practiced these days by the secular parties more or less in Israel. And as far as the American Jewish community is concerned, if you want to fight, or the Uruguayan Jewish community, I don't know what the situation is there, but if you want to get into a dispute, a Talmudic dispute or any kind of an intellectual dispute with the ultra-Orthodox, God bless and good luck.
We'll have 2 more questions, Jack, and then Dan.
It's not exactly a question.
Oh, is it a speech? Not a speech. Not a speech.
Mark,
A question.
A comment.
put a question mark at the end.
I put a question mark at the end. That I can do. That I can do. Bev.
Yeah.
Separation isn't going to fly. And it's not going to fly for a couple of different reasons. What you're really talking about is the creation of a Bantustan in Yerushalayim.
And you're talking as if it's that this
Well,
is a
he
small...
really doesn't mean it. It's
Just
just
wait, I understand. But
because we have Shas not only
Actually, yeah.
we take it so seriously.
Look, Shas is very important. I'm going to talk about that in just 1 second, okay? But what Ze'ev was really talking about was a severable part of the population that'll live in some corner over there, and they'll have one little piece and will have everything else. There's a problem with the will. And the problem is, first of all, Shas, which is to say the single most important political development in Israeli life in recent years has been the growth of Shas. This represents an enormous and growing part of the population. And if you think that they live in one part of the country, strictly between me and you, you're wrong. They live all over the country. All over the country. It's impossible physically to separate out the traditionalists, the mystics, the rabbis from those who are not believers and observant. It doesn't work. What would work? Who knows? I don't know. But I have some ideas. I'll throw out ideas. Some of the ideas are similar to what you were saying at the end. A constitution might work. You know that Israel doesn't have a constitution? I'm not an Israeli. You're an Israeli, but I'm a political scientist. A constitution might work. Separation of church and state might work. Universal national service, and I mean universal, might work, maybe, in terms of developing another consciousness. That's Israel. That's enough standing on one foot for Israel. Now I go to another subject. It'll make a short comment. It's not a speech, I promise. I'm a political scientist, you know. I spent years and years and years doing electoral studies. You know what I discovered from the electoral studies? Jews vote with their feet. Jews vote with their feet. This explains many things. It explains why there were once Jews in Pontiac and there aren't Jews in Pontiac. It explains why there were once Jews in Minsk and now maybe there are fewer Jews in Minsk. It also explains the fact, which I agree with you completely, that we're talking about a long-term process that's going to continue for a very, very long time in ways and in places that we can't predict sitting here in Michigan in 1999. Now, Jewish history is something that's been going on for thousands of years in lots of different places. It will continue, if for no other reason than just on the momentum, just on the physics of it, yeah? For the foreseeable future, for a number of generations, though not necessarily either in Pontiac or in Minsk. Ze'ev.
Good points. Mrs. Eleni, I hate to tell you this, but I am serious about this separation.
But you know it will never happen.
Well, I know it will happen before there's a constitution or a separation of church and state.
And you said you're optimistic. You said you're optimistic.
I'm an optimist. And just, 2 words about Shas, because Jack Jacobs makes a fair point, but, Shas has been described as an ultra-Orthodox but non-religious party. That is to say, its leadership is ultra-Orthodox, but its voters are not even Orthodox, a lot of them.
An enormously powerful school system inculcating,
any school system that can't pay its teachers is not enormously powerful. And it can only pay its teachers with the agreement of Ms. Deloney's party. And they're far from being enormously powerful. What they are is they're enormously scary to people who are scared by bullies. But the point that I was only making is this, that I don't think that the secular state already exists in Israel. The Bantustans are there already. I have no problem. I believe that most Shas voters would prefer to live in the secular state that I'm talking about. They don't want to live in a theocracy. Avadia Yosef might want to live in a theocracy, and maybe his 14 children, 14 daughters-in-law, and 72 grandchildren, all of whom work for the Ministry of the Interior, would like to live in a theocracy. But most of these people work for a living, and they want to live in a normal place, and they'll go to shul and they'll go to the football game the same way they always have. As far as Jews voting with their feet, I just want to say this. First of all, I think that's a very astute point. I think it's correct. But something has happened here which is very weird to me. And I'll tell you a very, very quick anecdote. I spent this past weekend, maybe I shouldn't say this. This is about people. Well, I spent this past weekend with a friend of mine who's Jewish, who married